Hello everyone, Stjepan here. I'll continue the series on Jose Raul Capablanca with a very nice game he played in 1924 in the New York tournament. And this tournament was organized because the match between Capablanca and Alekhine couldn't be organized in 1923. So one chess club, the Manhattan Chess Club, and the hotel in which the tournament was played decided to organize a tournament, a strong tournament to challenge the Cambridge Springs event, which was held at the beginning of the 20th century, and to match the significance of that event. And they had a lot of important players invited, the best players of the time: Savili Tartakower, Capablanca, Lasker, Alekhine, Richard Réti, very strong players. And of course, Capablanca was expected to win since he was the world champion for about 3 years now. And the only one who could challenge him, as they thought, was Alexander Alekhine. But it turned out that Emmanuel Lasker managed to win the tournament, surprising everybody because he was considered to be below his peak strength at the time. And of course, ever since he lost the match to Capablanca, he wasn't considered the best player anymore, especially because he resigned the title before accepting to play a match which was then held as a rematch. And officially, Capablanca was the champion who was defending the title, even though that was absurd. And in this game, Jose Raul Capablanca faced Richard Réti, the great opening theoretician, whose opening is 1 knight to f3. And after e4, Réti played e6, the French defense, d4, d5, knight to c3, knight to f6, the classical French, and we have bishop to g5, the Bern variation. The most common line would be e5, which is the Steinitz, but g5 is the second most common line, and usually it will transpose into the Rubinstein French, which it does in this game as well. And what's great about this game is that you can't really see the difference between this game and the French defenses played today. I think both players played on a really high level. There were no significant blunders, perhaps only small positional mistakes, and Capablanca simply managed to outplay Réti. And I think theoretically and positionally this game is very modern, and it could have been played yesterday. So now after bishop to g5, Réti plays bishop to e7. That's a slightly uncommon move. The most common variation is d takes e4, knight takes e4, bishop e7, not transposing to the same line, but they would reach this position in which white has let his advantage slip, but practically he stands okay and he has a lead in development and a bit more central control. So this is the most common line. But after bishop to e7, we have e5 now, knight f to d7, bishop takes e7, queen takes e7, and queen to d2. This is now the Rubinstein variation, and you can see that the center is still closed. Black still has to play his c5 central break, and white is going to continue with f4, so a common French defense plan, positional plan in the middle game. Réti castles, we have f4, c5, thematic pawn breaks, knight to f3. Of course, Capablanca lets Réti to decide what to do with the pawn. If he takes here, then Capablanca will play knight takes and have a very solid position, with black's only break being f6 and attacking the e5 pawn, but that would be an advantage for white. So Réti plays knight to c6, now threatening to take on d4, and we have d takes c5, knight takes c5. Now black used one of his pawn breaks, and the position is still even, of course. White will most commonly have a plan of knight to e2, knight to d4, blockading black's pawn structure and solidify his center, then perhaps even with c3. So this is a normal position still. It's still, it's not theory, but it has been played over 100 times in Grandmaster games. So bishop to d3, f6, black tries to get his second pawn break in, e takes f6. It wouldn't be good to allow f takes c, and then f takes c would give black an advantage. So Capablanca takes, e takes f6, queen takes f6, and now g3 is played, which is a very weird move. Of course, it's defending the f4 pawn, but I think he could have let go of that pawn, and perhaps with castling queenside, which I think would have been the best move in this position. Just castling queenside, allowing black to take and getting some open lines. Of course, c6 is a significant weakness, so white should have no trouble regaining the pawn. But g3 is solid enough. So we have g3, bishop d7, castles, and in this line, in this position, I would definitely consider castling queenside, and I think black would have more attacking chances with castling queenside, because after castles, let's say knight takes d3, grabbing the bishop, queen takes d3, bishop to e8, and the common plan is to get a bishop to g6 or to h5 to pressure this diagonal or this diagonal, which seems very active, but black's pawn weaknesses are too significant in this line, and I think castling queenside would have amplified that even more. So let's say rook h to e1, bishop g6, queen to d2, rook a c8, king to b1. You can see that even though the position is equal, I think white has practical chances, and positionally he stands much better. Of course, he can always play knight to e5, and if knight ever takes, rook takes, and e6 is dropping off no matter what black does. He can also try knight to b5, knight to d6, getting into those squares, and black has too many weaknesses in his camp. But after bishop to d7, Capablanca decided to castle kingside, which I think is far too passive, and I think he should have gone for castling queenside, but it's okay anyway. If you ask the engines, the position is equal, whatever he plays, whether he castles short or long. We now have knight takes d3, c takes d3, which I don't know why he didn't take with the queen. I think both moves are okay, but just visually I would always prefer to take with the queen, even though the c pawn now becoming the d pawn is going to stop black's passed pawn in the center, which can be created in some positions. So c takes d3, bishop to e8, still getting to the g6 square, which isn't as good in this position, of course, because the king isn't on c1 or on b1, so the bishop isn't that powerful. We have rook fe1, bishop to g6, which is an inaccuracy. Now, this is the first time white has a slight advantage, and knight to b5, which is a weird move by Capablanca, and it's not good. And in fact, he lost all of his advantage here. And I was looking at the move after bishop to g6, which is a mistake, simply knight to e5. And after knight to e5, I don't know what black does. I mean, you are threatening knight to d7, grabbing the exchange, you are attacking the bishop, and you are centralizing your pieces. And let's say knight takes e5, rook takes e5, this is almost strategically winning for white. And if after knight to e5, white plays bishop to f5, which is another move, then wait, let me just try something. Then this doesn't work for some reason. Yeah, okay, because of queen to d4 check. Yeah, he can always get out of that for now. But after bishop to f5, I think white is still much better. And let's say knight to b5 is played now, just getting his knight into the position, and of course blocking the d4 square. And now this check doesn't work anymore. So queen to e7 would have to defend d7. Knight takes c6, grabbing the knight. bc6, knight to d4, attacking the bishop, attacking the c6 pawn. c5, knight takes f5, rook takes f5. White is better here simply because of this weakness on e6. And rook e5 will be played, rook to e1, queen to e2, and the pawn will drop after f5. And there's no way for black to defend the position. But Capablanca played knight to b5, which seemingly is trying to achieve the same thing in a different move order, but it has one downside, and that's the fact that Réti can interpose e5, and now none of these things work. And after e5, he got his central pawn break, he has equalized in the position, and the knight no longer has the d4 square, the b knight doesn't have the b4 square, and it will have to retreat to c3. So Capablanca plays that immediately, c3, but now d4, and now knight to e4, and Réti gives up the bishop, bishop e4, rook to e4. Now it's equal once again, because it's not clear what black got with his pawn break. He decided to exchange some pieces, and okay, he managed to liquidate his weakness on e6. It's now the e5 pawn, and it can capture on f4, which can exchange the pawns, which he does. He takes f4, rook takes f4, and he now no longer has a clear weakness, but he doesn't have an edge either, which he could have had. Now queen to d6, rook to e1 is played, rook takes f4, queen takes f4, a few exchanges happened, and this position already looks like it could end up in a draw, and the most likely result is a draw. It's completely equal, but now Capablanca managed to outplay Réti. We have queen takes f4, g takes f4. Capablanca has 3 isolated pawns, but they are in fact perfectly placed to stop the knight from doing anything significant. Once a3 is played, the knight almost has no more scope. Here, king to f8 was played, rook to e4. Of course, now if the knight ever moves, then rook takes d4, rook e8, king to f2. He would like Réti to take here so that he can capture with the d pawn. h6, knight to e5. which is an okay move. The best was apparently rook takes e8, but I don't see a big difference. Knight takes e5, f takes e5, now the pawns are no longer doubled. King to f7, and the position is still equal. You can see the evaluation on the right side of the board. King to f3, getting closer to the middle of the board, which is always the first thing you should do in an endgame. Rook d8, rook to g4, g5, h4, king to g6. This was the first mistake. The best move was king to e6, attacking the e5 pawn, and now let's say h takes g5, h takes g5, rook takes g5, but now after rook to h8, black has enough counterplay for the pawn, and white is going to have to draw this position. But after h4, king to g6, this is now just better for white because the king can go to e5 and help to e4 and help queen the pawn. Now we have h takes, king to e4. Now you can see the difference immediately that white's king is far more active. The black king only has h5 and f7 as two significant squares in the position, which isn't enough. King to h5, rook to g1 is played, king to h4, which is another mistake. Best was to play g4 and try to advance your pawn as much as possible. Let's say g4, e6, king to h4, e7, rook to e8, stopping the pawn, king to f5, rook takes e7, and etc, etc. The position would be a draw. Apparently, white is only slightly better. The engine changes its mind after a while. But after rook to g1, king to h4, this is just completely losing for black. And Capablanca continues in the crudest way possible. e6, g4, e7, and this is where Richard Réti resigned. And I'm just going to show you a few variations why he resigned, because it seems that he could stop the pawn. Rook to e8 has to be played. This is the only move. Now, one thing that's clear is that after king to f4, which is one move for white, rook takes e7 doesn't work because of checkmate in one move, so you can't take the pawn. So after king to f4, you have two options. You can either play king to h3, which is perhaps even black can perhaps even draw. And now rook to g3 check, king to h2, rook takes g4, rook takes e7, king to f5, and okay, white is better, but black has some chances to draw this. Rook to e2, rook takes d4, rook takes b2, and I think black can draw this position. Even though the engines say that white is better, I think black can draw. So after king to f4, another move which black could have considered is king to h5, which is just losing immediately, because of king to f5, threatening checkmate and getting closer to this pawn. So now king to h4 has to be played, and now rook takes g4 is with check, king to h5, rook to g7, the king is cut off, this is busted completely, and white still has the extra pawn. So king to f4 doesn't really work because black can play king to h3, and this line is, I believe, a draw after rook takes b2. So the best move after rook to e8 for white, and this is I think why Réti resigned, is king to f5, and there's just no answer to this move, because now if rook takes e7, then rook g4 check, king h3, rook d4, and white is a pawn up, he's going to win this position. And after king to f5, if black doesn't take the pawn, then king to f6 is just winning and grabbing the rook. So this is it. This is why Richard Réti resigned after e7, and the resignation was completely justified. Only in case Capablanca blundered with king to f4, then perhaps Réti could have had a draw. Perhaps. Okay, I hope you like this French defense by Richard Réti and the attack by José Raul Capablanca. I think it was a very instructive game because they actually played on a very high modern level, almost engine strength throughout the game. Apart from the last few moves by Richard Réti, which were just imprecise positionally, and he let Capablanca win a drawn endgame. And okay, I hope you liked the video, thanks very much for watching, and stay tuned for more chess. Bye!